Hi, everyone. It's Larry Kotlikoff with Economics Matters. I'm here with on the fourth occasion with Andrew Fesiak. He's a political scientist and uh, military and economics and political correspondent from the Ukraine, embedded in the Ukraine. He's been he's a Canadian citizen, but he's been living and married to a Ukrainian and living in the Ukraine for decades and been reporting extensively on the war. And I'm going to let Andrew give us a quick update on, well, we have lots of new subscribers to this podcast. Indeed, it's gone viral in recent months. I mean, just dramatically, probably doubled the number of subscribers just in 2 months. So, Andrew, give us everybody a little bit of you, well, a lot of you, but uh, in a short period of time, about your background and uh, and also your other pursuits. I know you're into filmmaking as well as these other activities, but then we're going to talk immediately about the war and where it is and the geopolitics. Take it away. Great
Okay,
to see you.
thanks, Larry. Good to be back. Thanks for having me back. Yes, so I'm born and raised in Canada. I'm not so much a journalist. I study journalism, although I'm more of a Ukrainian studies expert. Let's say that, right? I studied at the Institute of Central East European Russian Area Studies at Carleton University in Ottawa. I did my BA and MA there. Went on to pursue a PhD at York University in Toronto. But when I finished high school, I studied at the Faculty of Journalism of Kiev State University in Kiev, of course, and that was from 1989 to 91, so the last 2 years of the existence of the Soviet Union. I had been there before that too, by the way. When I was 15 years old, I went there for the first time in 1985, a few months after Gorbachev got into power. Went there in 87 and 88 also, actually. So I've seen the Soviet Union and Soviet Ukraine, Russia, kind of, from a very long time ago, and up until now, I've been in, Ukraine on and off since '85. I've not been there 3 different years. Now I've been living there. This year it'll be 23 years. So yeah, so I know a thing or two about Ukraine, Russia, and the whole region, actually.
Great. And you're also working as a filmmaker, right?
Yes. So I work for Black Trident, Security and Defense Consulting Group, right? But also we own a business, actually family business. So we make television shows and films. Today actually is exactly it's going to be the premiere of a documentary that we've made, which is called Yaroslav Mudry, Godfather of Europe. Yaroslav Mudry was a Grand Prince of Kiev, back in the Middle Ages and stuff during the times of Kievan Rus. And his daughters married, a whole bunch of different kings of Europe. Most famous was Anne of Kiev, which was the Queen of France, actually. So she was a famous French queen. And the wife of Yaroslav Mudry was a Swedish princess. And so his kids married, I mean, all across Europe and stuff. So this film is important for Ukraine because it shows Ukraine's kind of contacts and bonds to the rest of Europe.
So grandfather means literally grandfather, really
Godfather, but yeah, but no,
godfather,
it does not mean mafia Godfather. No.
not mafia, much just more influential blood relations. And well, that sounds interesting. And it's coming out just in Ukraine, or will it be in the U.S.?
Right
Europe?
now, it's coming. Well, hopefully, later on it will be. Our movies are on Netflix actually, but this one, it's starting off in Ukraine, so it'll hit theaters on the 27th. Today's kind of the premiere pre-showing of it, right, for journalists. And there's actually 27 different embassies that were interested and were sending, either their ambassadors or their, counselors, whatever. So that's quite interesting, and but it probably will eventually make it to the U.S. also.
So, Andrew, we've been talking about the war with you really from the beginning of the invasion at the different stages. And last time it was, it might have been a year ago, I forget exactly, but uh, it looked like Ukraine was in a position to recover uh, occupied territory because it had acquired some new equipment, particularly tanks, and I think you were optimistic, as was the West, obviously, and Ukraine itself, about being able to push Russia out of occupied eastern Ukraine and Crimea, including Crimea. Uh, but that did not succeed. And I guess the question, I mean, I want to talk about how you view that situation, why it didn't succeed, and but I think the main thing to start with is where we are now, just on the battlefield. Is Ukraine about to be overrun by Russia? Is the U.S. still actively supporting Ukraine in terms of its defense? Has the U.S. withdrawn any weapons? We know that the U.S. temporarily stopped providing intelligence information to and guidance information, but are we in a situation where the U.S. is helping to the extent it was under Biden? Has there been any disconnect from Starlink, the satellite internet service that Elon Musk provides? Tell us what's up.
Okay. The last time we spoke, it was actually Ukrainian Independence Day, so it was August 24th of last year. And at that time, Ukraine forces just entered Kursk Oblast of Russia. Right now, as it stands, basically the Ukrainians are retreating from Kursk Oblast. They're still there, but they're almost out. However, last week what happened was, and this is a very new development, so the Ukraine side is not really commenting on it, is that the Ukrainian forces have now entered Belgorod Oblast of Russia, right? And so there's fighting going on there right now. So it just goes to show that, yeah, okay, I mean, whatever's going on, the Ukrainians can still make a dent into Russia in all sorts of different places. As for support, the support that Ukraine is getting right now from the United States is really only support that the Biden administration gave Ukraine, and it's still trickling in. So when Trump stopped giving Ukraine weapons and intelligence, these were weapons which Biden had sent. The Trump administration has given no new weapons. They have given nothing, right? So so it's funny that Trump wanted to be thanked so much in that famous, infamous meeting in the Oval Office, although Trump and Vance had done absolutely nothing for Ukraine. Even when Trump was in power that first time, he sold Ukraine javelins, right? And it wasn't a large amount. I mean, especially if you look at the amount of tanks and armored personnel carriers and vehicles the Russians have. So the amount that they sold wasn't all that much, but it was sold, so it was purchased by Ukraine. This was not a gift. I'm not sure if Trump forces the Saudis to beg on their or thank him on their knees about every time they buy something from the U.S. Right? So in any case, yeah. Ukraine's not, it's getting those weapons again, but again, it's only the weapons that the Biden administration sent. It is not these are not new weapons, which Trump is, given. He's given nothing of his own, that is.
Just to be clear, I mean, the U.S. has provided aid for free, given Ukraine money to buy the weapons from the U.S. Or weapon systems under Biden. I'm not saying under Trump, but there has been some unilateral, uh, uh, let's say, grants to Ukraine, but it hasn't been of the magnitude that Trump has mentioned. To my understanding, he's indicated we've provided something like $300 billion of aid to Ukraine, but it's more like 100 billion. Is that correct? Or
119. Yeah, I mean, there's, basically it's $119 billion that the US has given. That's military aid and financial aid altogether. But the Europeans have given 139 billion. Okay, so the Europeans have given actually more. But the other thing is this, I want to remind people about, what some of this military aid is and how it works. Okay. When the US gives Ukraine certain weapon systems, it doesn't give anything brand new. I mean, other than, maybe some missiles for Patriot systems, and even then they're probably not, right off the factory floor. They're probably ones which were in storage anyway. But when it comes to other weapon systems like Humvees, Bradleys, they gave 31 Abrams. That's not much, right? That's nothing actually, compared to the amount of losses that both sides have experienced. But other things, the U.S. has not given any F-16s. European partners have done that. But all these weapons that the U.S. U.S. has given, there's other systems. These are old systems. They're very old. A lot of these things were sitting there in the desert, basically, just, in storage. And although for Ukraine, this is, great. I mean, we need it, right? We need anything. So of course, Ukraine's grateful, and Ukrainians and Zelensky have thanked the United States many, many, many times, right? So Trump and Vance saying that they haven't, Zelensky hasn't said any thanks or anything is completely wrong. However, let me just explain how it works. Let's say you buy a flat screen TV, right? You buy a brand new flat screen TV. But you take your old, tube TV, it still works, right? But it's old, it's an old model, you throw it in your garage, right? And it's been in there now for, 15 years or whatever, this old big tube TV. Now, along comes me, right? And I don't have a TV, so I could use anything. So you've been nice enough to give me that old tube TV. Now, you wouldn't be able to sell it. Nobody would buy it. I mean, other than for, some sort of scrap, right? But I'm happy to have it and I'm grateful, right? You've given the TV, it works. I can now watch television. I'm happy, right? But what you then do is you say, well, I've given Andrew, and you put the original price on there. So it's like, you bought it for $800, let's say, when you bought it brand new. And so basically that's how they're working is that they're not saying that, well, yeah, it's actually worthless. It's not worth much. Probably I'm helping you out more by getting rid of it for you, right? But you're saying, well, I bought it for $800, so this is an $800 gift to Andrew, right? But I mean, really, it's not, right? Because I mean, it was just sitting there taking up your space, kind of
So
rotting away, right?
yeah, the replacement cost of this grant, if you like, could be more like 50 billion, not 109 billion.
Well, right. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so they calculate it using kind of the brand new price, but I mean, really, in honesty, it's not worth that much. I mean, Ukraine's not going to complain and say, "Oh, come on, no, that's not the real price." Of course, they're going to be grateful. We need it. It works. It's still all these weapons, they still fire, they still protect cities. So, okay, great, right? But to say that and then the U.S. When they get rid of these weapons, they produce new weapons, which create jobs in the United States, of course, right? But it's not to say that, so this sum amount which they give is not real. It's not actually a real amount because if you actually wanted to sell it to some other country, well, they probably wouldn't buy it because it's so old, right? And just wouldn't be worth that much. So you'd be selling it for like, I don't know, scrap metal probably, right? So again, Ukrainians are extremely, thankful for this. Zelensky is extremely thankful because it is helping us. It's a massive help to us. But to sit there when you put a calculation on it, I mean, okay, look, those calculations aren't exactly correct, right? I mean, if Ukraine actually had to buy it, right? I think they wouldn't be buying it for that original, price. They'd be saying, well, listen, it's not worth that much. If we're going to buy it, well, with our own money, well, we'll buy it for a hell of a lot less,
I
right?
think I think that I mean even beyond this, which is the amount of uh, transfer of military equipment to Ukraine for whatever price, it's the Ukrainians soldiers that are defending uh, freedom in Western Europe and democracy, and ultimately the U.S. So I think the thanks should be going the other direction. It's not the Ukrainians are defending the U.S. in this war, uh, even if President Trump and Vice President Vance don't understand that. Uh, they're defending our allies in Europe, and they're defending. We have been involved in two massive world wars in the defense of Europe, and that could turn into a third world war if Ukraine were to collapse. So, if any thanks is due, in my mind, it's thanks from Vance and Trump to Zelensky and the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian country, nation. And but I think Zelensky acted extremely carefully and maturely, and I don't think he was humiliated. I think Trump and Vance humiliated themselves in this encounter. But let's move on to where is the battle, the war right now on the battlefield? What's the situation, the military
Let me
situation?
just add one more thing because we always hear about, oh, the US won't put boots on the ground. They won't put boots on the ground in Ukraine, right? But let me just remind you, and I'm sure you know this, but you may have forgotten, as probably all your viewers, that in Iraq, when the US went to war against Iraq the second time, Ukraine sent 6,000 soldiers, okay? 6,000 soldiers, which helped the US in Iraq. It helped them in the war in Iraq, right? 18 Ukrainians died there, right? So Ukraine did put boots on the ground for the United States already. right? I mean, I would say, let's make things fair. Send us 6,000 U.S. soldiers to, help us. We put 6,000 on boots on the ground for you. Why don't you do that for us? And then we can thank each other, right? But we keep hearing, oh no, no, no boots on the ground, no boots on the ground. But Ukraine has put boots on the ground for the U.S. Also, Ukraine sent people to Kosovo. I was in the mountains of Kosovo and saw, the Ukrainian soldiers that were there. And they were peacekeepers, kind of protecting Serbian villages, right? But I mean, this, had to be done by someone. And of course, if it was U.S. soldiers, they probably would have been attacked because it was Ukrainian soldiers, who share the same faith largely with the Serbs and stuff, and were more or less friendly. It was okay, right? And the Ukrainians did a good job there during the war in Yugoslavia. By the way, something also few people know is that a few days after what happened at Srebrenica and the mass genocide that happened there, a few days later, in a place called Zepa, Ukrainian soldiers, which were protecting Zepa, actually were able to save the local Muslim population. And what they did was that there was also going to be a massacre there. But what the Ukrainians did was they talked to the Serbs and they were able to get everyone out by bus. They shipped the entire village out by bus, on many buses, of course. And one soldier got on each bus to protect the bus. So they saved those people, right? I mean, you can look that up. So, and another thing in Afghanistan, when Biden was pulling out of Afghanistan, it was the Ukrainian HUR, right, the Ukrainian Intelligence Directorate, which sent its people there. And they're the only ones, the only army that actually went into Kabul. So it didn't sit there on the airport, behind the airport walls, but actually went into Kabul and saved around 80 Afghans who had been working for Canada and also the United States, while the U.S. was there. And they're the only ones who went there and did that. That also should have showed you what Ukrainians have, and the guts they've got. And that, later when the Russians invaded, they should have taken that to note, right? The Ukrainians are not going to surrender. They're not scared kind of, to do things like this, right? So
Right.
that's extremely important to say that Ukraine's been there and has helped the United States with boots on the ground, right? So for us to hear that, oh, gee, thank us for all these weapons, right? These old weapons. I mean, yes, we are saying thank you. Thank you very much, right? But you know what? You can actually put boots on the ground to Ukraine too, right? We've given you 6,000 troops to Iraq. It would be nice to do the same. Of course, I'm saying that kind of tongue in cheek, right? Because I know that's not going to happen, right? But I mean, I wish that Zelensky did remind, Trump and Vance of that, right? Of course, Trump and Vance, they're always, their answer is that, well, that wasn't me. That wasn't me. It wasn't my administration, right? So, so I don't think they would care. But back to your question about what's going on now. Very little movement has happened on the ground, actually, when it comes to military affairs. The Russians have taken, I mean, a few kilometers here and there, but then again, since we spoke last in August, I mean, the Ukrainians, they invaded Kursk Oblast of Russia, the first time that's ever been done in history since World War II that someone's invaded Russia. And like I pointed out then, there's no nuclear war, there's no World War III, everything's fine, right? Because, as I joked then too, I mean, the Ukraine joke was we entered Kursk Oblast, we're looking for red lines. We haven't found any, right? So Ukraine's been largely pushed out of Kursk right now, but like I said, they just entered Belgorod Oblast. So things are kind of going back and forth in certain places. There are certain other places around in the Donetsk Oblast where Ukraine forces have actually taken over villages and stuff. They've actually taken them back. So a place called Nadia, a little village called Nadia, just yesterday, actually, Ukraine forces took that back in Lugansk Oblast. Okay, so so it's kind of back and forth like that. So there's not much going on. I mean, there's much going on. There's lots of fighting. It's not like there's not fighting. It's just that the Russians aren't getting far. So they can push, a few kilometers, maybe, it's really meters, actually, maybe a day here or there, then get pushed back. And then Ukrainians are pushing in certain other areas also. What's happened more of significance, probably, is the amount of drones that Ukraine is now producing. So Ukraine is now producing around, well, around 3,000, that's the target, I think, 3,000 long distance. It'll be 3,000 missiles per year. 30,000 long-distance drones per year. When I say missiles, I mean long-distance missiles. The most recent thing that's just happened a few days ago is there was information that the Neptune, the Ukrainian cruise missile, which sank the Moskva flagship of the Black Sea Fleet, that missile has now been improved to a distance of 1,000 kilometers. So just so you understand, from the Ukrainian border to Moscow, it's around 550 kilometers. So that means that really European Russia is basically all within the radius of this Neptune missile. It's a cruise missile, and it blew up. I believe it was a it was an oil storage facility, I think it was, that it blew up like last week. So they're making these now, and there's all sorts of attack drones which have been attacking all sorts of oil and gas facilities, new weapons storage sites, military bases. I mean, you name it. So that is something which has increased kind of drastically in the last since we spoke last.
What about Russian drones and missile attacks on Ukraine? Have they picked up? Are they doing more damage? Are they uh, destroying the energy infrastructure of Ukraine to a greater extent? I mean, if you compare today with last August when we talked, is Ukraine, militarily in worse shape, ignoring the future, ignoring whether or not there's going to be a resupply of arms from either Russia, the Europeans, or from the U.S. But tell me, just, if you look around Ukraine, is the situation much worse?
When it comes to, let's say, electricity supply, energy supply, well, I can tell you this. I actually went out and bought myself for my apartment a generator. It's called an EcoFlow. It's basically like a big power bank, right? This thing costs around 1,600 euros. Okay, so that's what, maybe $1,800 dollars basically. So it's not cheap. And it'll basically you can plug everything in there. It'll have everything working, for a few hours and stuff, and then it recharges once they turn the electricity back on. I bought this thing over the Christmas holidays, and and I used it once. Okay, the electricity went off for I think half an hour, something like that. I think even less. It was maybe 15 minutes. And so I'm a little bit upset because I thought, gee, there's not going to be electricity all winter long or something like this, and really, it wasn't bad at all. So it was rare occasions actually that the electricity was going off. There are places where, if there's a power station in some area which they hit, okay, so in that area the electricity would go off. Usually it's not off for all that long though. I mean, this is bad, of course, and the Russians are doing this on purpose by hitting civilian targets always, whether it's energy, electricity generating stations or hospitals, schools. I mean, you name it, right? But really, and okay, Kiev is of course better protected. The air defenses are better there, of course, than anywhere else. But I must say that for the situation in Kiev, I mean, so I've only used this generator once, this EcoFlow, and yeah, other places I know, because we always, hear that, okay, some substation got hit there, so electricity goes off, but really it's only for a few hours at a time probably, and they end up rebuilding things or, somehow bypassing it very quickly. So I mean, it's a problem in any case because the Russians keep trying. What I have noticed lately is, I mean, the technologies on both sides are increasing massively. This is a problem for Western armies because now Ukraine and Russia have probably the most modern armies in the world right now when it comes to fighting with drones and stuff. So there's all sorts of things where electronic jamming measures were working before. They work less now. The Russians have been able to get around certain technologies. So of course the Ukrainians will then create something new to kind of like either jam or bring down their drones. They're using new tactics. So for example, the Russians massively attacked Odessa just the other week. And what they did was the drones would usually fly in these Shahed Iranian drones, which, they fly in rather low, but then they can be shot down by machine gun fire, for example. And there's machine gun teams like around all the cities, which then, shoot down these drones. But what they did was they went to a height of 2 kilometers. Okay. And then they dive bombed in, which means that a height of 2 kilometers is really hard to shoot them down with a machine gun. And you don't really see them all the time. So that's a problem. Yeah, so they're using different tactics too. So of course each side is learning and I mean improving, the ways that they bring death to the other side.
In any case, let me ask the question, can Europe supply Ukraine with what it needs?
For the most part, yes, you're right. The big problem is the Patriot missile system. That is the best missile system in the world. It's the one which can knock down, all the Russian ballistic missiles. So this is a problem because, the Germans make Iris-T that's very modern and stuff. It's great, but it's the Patriot that can, shoot down the ballistic missiles, and those can do a lot of damage. Nothing else will shoot them down, basically. So this is a big problem. Other than that, even intelligence, the U.S. has the best intelligence capability in the world, of course, but nonetheless, the French, and when it comes to spy satellites, I mean, the French and the British, they also have, their own capabilities. Might not be as good as this, as what the U.S. has, but nonetheless, it'll help. But don't forget also the Ukrainians have their own intelligence capabilities. The Ukrainian, SBU, the Security Service Ukraine, and the military intelligence. I mean, they have a fantastic intelligence capability, right? It's not spy satellites, but I mean everything else. I mean, drones, human intelligence, all sorts of things. And this is the thing: the U.S. stopped giving Ukraine intelligence. Ukraine stops giving the U.S. intelligence too. And this is, the Ukraine side has been very, very beneficial to the U.S., both in intelligence capabilities and in teaching the U.S., the new ways of fighting. I mean, with drones and all sorts of other tactics, what the Russians use, how they act. So the U.S. has been learning a great deal from the Ukraine armed forces and from Ukraine intelligence. So this kind of works both ways. But back to the question of weapons, the Europeans have now. Put it this way, Rheinmetall, which is one of the biggest arms producers in Europe, and it's a German company. I mean, make all sorts of things, and their shares on the stock market have risen by 171% in the last 6 months. And a lot of that is actually right now when Trump got into office and they basically, started saying that we're not going to help out Europe. The Europeans have kind of opened their eyes finally, and they realize that they cannot rely on the U.S. That is Trump, basically. I should actually, state they cannot rely on Trump, of course, because everyone realizes that, America's America. The Americans are very supportive of Europe and Canada and Ukraine, right? But then there's Trump, right? There's Trump and his administration, which is totally different, But he's the president, right? And he controls now, the Congress and stuff. So I mean, what are you going to do, right? I mean, that's the thing. He's the one. So, but the Europeans have opened their eyes, and so they are now putting a lot of money. The Germans just passed the law. They had this debt break, which did not allow them to go into debt, and they've just now changed that, and they are going to be spending something like 800 billion euros on defense, basically, and infrastructure for defense. So that's a massive amount. I mean, just something unheard of.
Yeah, but the
Germans,
impact is going to be 5 years from now, right? It's going to take a while for them to build up.
it
Will you
is.
be able to survive for 5 years without new Patriot missiles? I guess is the bottom line here.
Well, Patriot missiles is the big problem, right? But I mean, Ukraine's going to be getting all sorts of other things nonetheless. And because the Germans also, I mean, they make these Storm Shadow missiles, right? Which, these are, missiles for attacking targets. Kind of like the Taurus is like the Storm Shadow, something like this. They fly a longer distance though. So this is going to be important for Ukraine because Ukraine's wanted these for the last few years. There's all sorts of weapon systems
Germans,
that
or
they
is that
can't.
the British? Is that I'm not sure which the Storm
Storm
Shadow,
Shadow is
the
there's
German.
Storm Shadow and Scalp. Those are basically the same missile systems. Storm Shadow is British, Scalp is French. They made them together basically. They just named them a bit differently. There's slight differences in them. Then the Taurus is a German missile. Okay, it's more modern. It flies a little bit further. So this is important. So the Europeans are ramping up, defense spending and defense production. That's why the shares in Rheinmetall, Dassault Aviation, Thales, I mean, they've all risen massively, since Trump's got into power. So they can give Ukraine a lot of things. Another thing is this is a big difference since we last spoke also, is Ukraine now produces about 40% of its own weapon systems. And one great thing that's happened is, I mean, Ukraine has a really big arms industry, but the government never had enough money to actually, give to the arms producers to make the weapons. So, they made weapons for export and all sorts of things, but, the Ukraine government was just, didn't have enough money to buy the weapons. The T-34 tank during World War II, it's not a Russian tank, it's a Ukrainian tank. It's Soviet, but it was a Ukrainian tank. It was made in Kharkiv at the Malyshev plant, made and designed in Kharkiv, right? So that same plant still makes one of the best tanks in the world, the Oplot. But the Oplot was much more expensive than Ukraine taking older tanks and modernizing them, right? But now what the Europeans have started doing, and they call this the Danish kind of initiative, right? Is the Danes were the first ones to give Ukraine, they actually put in orders with Ukrainian defense manufacturers to produce weapons. And so the Ukrainians can produce these weapons. They have all sorts of things. And because of the war, Ukraine weapons get tested right on the battlefield. So that's great. I mean, because, if it's not battle tested, then, you don't know if it's going to work well or not. So that's what the Europeans have started doing. They realized that they may not be able to increase production of European weapons so quickly, but the Ukrainians can. And so now a whole bunch of countries have been just investing in the Ukraine arms producers is for the Ukrainians to make the weapons themselves.
But are they investing for the Ukrainians not just to make the weapons, but to keep the weapons? That's the question. Are they giving
Yes.
the weapons that are being produced in Ukraine to Ukraine to use
Yes,
them?
of course. I mean that's the whole point. Is it that not just giving Ukraine weapons, but you invest in Ukrainian producers of weapons so that they produce weapons for the Ukrainian military. That's the whole point of it. Yeah, yeah. It's not so that they then go and export it. No, not at all. Yeah. So this is great. There's a artillery system. It's on the chassis of a truck. It's called the Bogdana, right? Made in Ukraine. It's a fantastic. It shoots 155 millimeter shells at a distance of like around 40 kilometers, and that's great. I mean, that's something that's very, very necessary. So yeah, Ukraine's ramping up production of those because European countries have been investing. All sorts of other things. I mean, the drone producers, it's crazy. These FPV drones. Last time we spoke, I was telling you how there was Zelensky wanted to produce a million drones per year. By August, they had already reached a million. They're making more. Now the target is 4 million. Okay. And because these things are not produced in, one plant or factory, they're actually produced all over the country in like little small kind of, little, factories, whatever you want to call them, warehouses. So that means they can't be attacked and destroyed, because I mean, you can attack one or whatever, but I mean, you can't ruin them all. So this is, and by the way, right now, these FPV drones, right? So first person view drones, they're the ones which are used right on the front lines. They fly a distance of, I mean, up to 40 kilometers. So they're not long distance, but they now account for, this is another big way the war has changed. They now account for 80% of casualties, okay, on the front, 80%. If before it was artillery shells and stuff, now it's actually drones. So that's a massive difference how the war has changed.
So, okay, let's talk about the politics, right? As we are speaking, the Ukrainians are meeting, or some Ukrainian officials are meeting with U.S. officials in Saudi Arabia. It's an interesting place to be meeting. I don't quite get why these meetings have to take place there, but um, where do you view, I think Trump is largely unpredictable even to Trump. Uh, uh, I'm not sure, what the other side of the mirror is going to tell him in the morning to do on some days because he seems to reverse course so often. Uh, and this may just be, it looks to be a pattern, go to the extreme, threaten, gets somebody to give in something that, and may actually be reasonable, threaten to pull out of NATO and get NATO to actually get active. And that may be just a brilliant strategy on Trump's part. I don't want to kind of be denigrating Trump. Uh, Remains to be seen exactly uh, how pro-Russian he is. Uh, and what's your reading at this point? We have some pretty negative comments coming out of his representatives. Witkoff is the chief negotiator. Somehow he's taken over for uh, for uh, for Rubio, our Secretary of Defense, and Marco Rubio. How do you view the whole scenario here? Where do you think Trump's really coming from? Or is that just impossible to know?
Oh God. Well, last time we spoke, I remember saying, I didn't think Trump was getting into power. I had a lot, greater hope in the American people than that they were not going to elect him. But obviously, I was, wrong. Um,
Well, let's be clear. I don't think the American people voted for taking 500,000 immigrants that we invited into this country from Venezuela and Cuba and several other countries who are fleeing their countries and telling them, as we did yesterday, you have a month to leave, uh,
yeah.
get on the plane and go. Otherwise, you'll be arrested and maybe sent to El Salvador. I don't think anybody voted for that. But anyway, go ahead.
Right. The funny thing is actually when I look at this, and when Ukrainians look at this, we see a replay of what happened in Ukraine, actually. People elected Yanukovych, right? The pro-Russian, mafia boss, basically he was, right? He'd done, two stints in prison. Um, you know, and I remember telling people you can't vote for someone who had been in prison. I mean, someone that, has been breaking the law and stuff like that. I mean, if he gets into power, of course he's going to break the law. I mean, he has no respect for the law or the Constitution or anything else. It's funny because, I mean, Trump, they didn't put him in prison, but he should be in prison, basically. He's got more indictments than even Yanukovych had, so, and this is ridiculous. I mean, how do you vote for a person like that? But then you shouldn't be surprised when he starts breaking the law, breaking, the Constitution, all these things. I mean, nobody should be surprised by this. This is not a person that respects the law or the Constitution. Okay. Look, this, if I said this before he got elected, people start saying, "Oh, gee, well, there's some conspiracy theories." There is so much information out there now, and there's all sorts of people who are, very, high level academics and, politicians and the like who now firmly believe, and I mean, on both sides of the ocean, that Trump is a Russian asset. Okay. And this isn't just a conspiracy. I mean, if you look at the fact that he had six bankruptcies, and then the Russian mafia, and this is like official information, the Russian mafia ended up buying real estate from him at like, you know, higher prices than market value. I mean, this is just, and we all know, by the way, that the Russian mafia has ties to the Kremlin. Okay. So already Trump, owes thanks to, the Russian mafia and the Russians. Trump's son, forget which one, actually said that a lot of the people who buy the real estate are Russians. Yeah, there was actually a quote about that he said that. We know that they've meddled in, U.S. elections. I mean, it's funny because, Americans don't want to admit to how actually effective that was. Well, now you've got Trump in power, right? Twice. Now, the other thing is this, right? I mean, okay, given all that, you'd say, well, okay, yeah, give him the benefit of the doubt, right? But I mean, listen, right now, what he's doing, and there's this one, so I can't tell you who it was. Maybe you saw this video. There was a congressman anyway who he was grilling some, and I don't know who they were. Were they from this, security establishment or something? But they were like, under Trump somehow. And he asked them, and he said, I'm sure a lot of your viewers saw this video. And he asked these people, he said, if there was a Russian asset who became president of the United States, what would he do different from that which Trump is doing now, right? And that's true. I mean, everything Trump has been doing, a great deal of what he's been doing has been to the benefit of Russia and even China, I would say, creating internal turmoil, right? Cutting away at the intelligence services, the FBI, CIA, and other ones. He installs this Patel guy as the head of the FBI. Tulsi Gabbard is the head of this National Intelligence Agency. Or, sorry, what the name is if I get it wrong. These are people who have very strange views. I mean, Tulsi Gabbard is like just pro-Russian. She was pro-Assad and stuff like this. Why would you do that? I mean, then there's all sorts of other, like I said, I mean, ruining the social security system, ruining your medical system, all sorts of things within the country, which he's doing, which is causing turmoil. It's causing a lot of, problems. But then, outside of the United States, picking fights with Canada and Mexico, your closest trade partners, by raising tariffs to 25%. And okay, I'm sure of course, you have, the majority of your illegal immigrants come from Mexico and the fentanyl trade comes from Mexico. But Canada, I mean, take a look at the map, right? I mean, how do illegal immigrants come from Canada to the United States, right? I mean, you have to get to Canada, you're not going to take a boat and get to Canada first and then go to the US. Why wouldn't you just enter the US? I mean, you're not coming from the north. There are no countries north of Canada other than, on the other side of the Arctic. How do you get to Canada? So, the illegal immigration from Canada is nil. And if you already made it to Canada, you're probably going to stay there because, I mean, listen, standard of living in Canada, I'm sorry to say, is higher
Okay.
than it is in the United
So
States.
Andrew, okay, so Andrew, you know, let's say Trump were is a Russian asset, and this is all just show of having to. What's the conclusion of this? Do these negotiations break down, and then
Okay.
uh, he blames it on Ukraine, and then he pulls the Patriots out, and does Ukraine collapse, or can Ukraine, how much damage, to what extent will this, hand over Ukraine to Russia? That's, I think, the number one question
Yeah.
here. If we go to the extreme, which is that Trump is, short of uh, the U.S. sending military equipment and even boots on the grounds to Russia to help them invade Ukraine, uh, and maybe get a share of Ukraine at the end of the day. Uh, what do you what do you view as happening? And then I have a kind of a follow-up question, which is quite different, which is part of, I don't think anybody knows for sure. As I said, it's possible Trump is a Russian agent. He certainly had a lot of contact. There was an article in the Guardian that seemed to have some factual basis. I'm not into conspiracy theories, neither are you, but you look at actions, and actions do speak louder than words uh,
Exactly.
in this context. And you've just listed a large number of actions that nobody would remotely have thought would be possible, and that the voters did not vote for. We did not vote for uh, calling Canada the 51st state and threatening militarily to invade them, which is kind of the implication. He hasn't outright said that. He said he would economically conquer Canada. And, but what about the Ukraine actually applying for statehood in the US? If he's not a Russian agent, if he's really just a transactional agent, which is the other view of Trump, that he really just treating everything as a business. The U.S. is Trump Inc., and he wants to expand Trump Inc. Why doesn't the Ukraine say, look, forget Canada, just buy us. Well, we'll become your 51st state uh, today. What about that? Anyway, but let's talk about the first scenario, which is that he is an agent, and that he is going to withdraw all support for Ukraine. Can Ukraine survive in the short run?
Right. Okay. I did not say he's an agent. I said he's an asset, right? That's a little bit different. Okay. An agent is something where he's got direct payment from, the Russian security services, something like this. But he's more of a useful idiot, probably someone who's grateful to Russia. They know how to deal with him, and that's why. Yeah. So look,
So you don't think they're giving him directives as to what exactly to do?
I think what it is it's like dealing with the spoiled little brat kind of, you kind of, you massage his ego, you help him, you give him gifts, you help him out and stuff like that. And then you give him advice. And I mean, the Putin is he's a KGB colonel he was, right? And this is his life. This is what he understands. And the Russians are very good with this. So they saved his skin lots of times. And so, I mean, again, he's not an agent, right? I'm sure of that, but he's definitely an asset. He's helping them out massively, and this is for everyone to see. I will say this. This is very, very good on the one hand, because if it was more kind of hidden, then the Europeans, they would be still sleeping right now, right? They would be sleeping through all this, thinking that no, this is just transactional. That's just his, way of dealing with things. They've been hit hard and woken up. Okay. And so that's why right now they realize Trump has said basically NATO's it's finished right now. For while Trump is in office, it's on pause. Trump, NATO will not work. He's basically told the Europeans that you deal with your own security. That means there's no Article 5. But the Europeans are weak. I mean, they, like we said, you said, right? It'll take years for the Germans to work up their military with that $800 billion, right? So What's important is there's no U.S. military that's going to come. They cannot trust that the U.S. military will come to their aid if Russia invades. They were already worried about that before Trump was in power. They were worried that if Russia defeats Ukraine, or even if it doesn't totally defeat Ukraine, it will come and it will test the Article 5 and it will attack one of the Baltic states. Okay. So they were worried about that even when the U.S. was
If that were to
supposedly,
happen tomorrow, today, what happens? And
if
the
it
U.S.
happened
does not
today.
respond. If the U.S. does not
I
respond,
think Trump would not respond. I think he
okay,
would not
so
respond.
would Poland respond? Would Germany and Poland respond?
Well, and they would have to because they would have to do something. Like the Poles are arming themselves to the teeth massively. They're spending 5% of GDP right now on arms and stuff like this, and so they understand. I mean, the Baltic states, Finland, the Scandinavians, Poland, they totally understand this. I'm sure they would come to the aid of the Baltics because they would understand. The Baltics would be taken over by lunch hour. The next is Poland, maybe Finland. So, they would understand this. And so the Russians, I mean, and they could easily do this. And I'm sure Trump would not come to the aid of the Baltics because, the argument would be, well, who are these Baltics? I mean, listen, they used to be part of Russia anyway, which is true. They were part of the Russian Empire. So, I mean, and there's a lot of Russian speakers there. Like Witkoff was saying, oh, but these people in Eastern Ukraine, they're all Russian speakers. I mean, this is such a ridiculous argument, of course. I mean, it's been proven wrong so many times. Um, but
A lot
anyway,
of Spanish speakers doesn't mean Spain should take over the U.S., right?
well, exactly, right? It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that, I mean, well, I mean, you used to be British subjects. Why aren't you anymore? I mean, you speak English, don't you? Right? So I mean, this is such a, I mean, really, it's ridiculous. I mean, it's a very uneducated, ignorant argument. But this thing, the Europeans have woken up right now. They've had this massive wake up because of Trump. Everything that happened at the Munich Security Conference, and then after this, the Oval Office meeting. That's it. I think they understand. They also understand that it's better to have U.S. on your side, of course. So they're not going to come out openly against the U.S. And for Zelensky, of course, we need U.S. help, and it would be better, of course, that the U.S. is our ally and friend, and we have help from the U.S. and so on and so on. So nobody's going to come out and say, hey, you're a Russian asset, right? I mean, they're not going to say that. But this whole peace process, look, Ukraine, nobody wants peace more than the Ukrainians want peace. I mean, it would be just ridiculous to think otherwise. However, we in Ukraine understand that if, you know, to give the Russians what they've now, militarily occupied, first of all, there are Ukrainians which they occupy, which they, rape, torture, murder on a daily basis and deport. Okay. The latest thing is that Putin has said that if you don't have Russian citizenship by September 10th, right, you have to get out of the country. Okay. So he's forcing them all to have Russian citizenship. Otherwise, they have to leave those territories. The Crimean Tatars in Crimea, that is their native land. I mean, they've had, genocides against them by the Russians, I mean, throughout history. They will basically, I mean, they'll be gone as an ethnic group. They'll just, I mean, they'll be gone because I mean, everything the Russians going to do, they're going to force them to basically either leave or whatever, or assimilate, and so that'll be the end of them as an ethnic group, as a people. So this is the thing: Ukrainians want peace, but it can't be a peace where the Russians are rewarded with these. It's not the land, the territories. It's like they have these areas, and again, this convinces what should be interesting for the U.S. and important for the U.S. is it convinces other countries around the world that you can just go and attack another country, take over its territory, and people will make a little bit of a fuss for a while, and then they'll be okay with it, right? It also means that countries are going to say Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons for U.S. security assurances, and Russian ones and British ones, of course, and others, and then they got attacked, right? They gave up their nuclear weapons, so that's a bad idea. But what is a good idea is to have nuclear weapons, and again, if Ukraine doesn't get, NATO, well, see, again, NATO is not going to work right now, but if it does not get some sort of really serious security guarantees, real ones, not like what happened in Budapest, then I think nuclear weapons is the way that Ukraine should go. And even Poland has expressed interest in nuclear weapons. So it's making the world a far, far more dangerous place. But back to Trump, in any case, it's not the Ukrainians that need a peace agreement right now. We need more weapons. We need to be given more weapons, better weapons, longer distance weapons, and the right to use those weapons anywhere we see necessary. That's what Ukraine needs. The Russians, the last time we spoke, I told you how the Russians were now riding into battle on like scooters and stuff like this. Okay. and motorcycles. Now they're riding into battle on horses and donkeys. Okay, so it is getting worse and worse and worse for them. Trump is basically saving Russia from defeat right now. That's what he's doing. He's not helping Ukraine. When he says he wants to prevent all these deaths, I mean, I don't believe at all that Trump could give a damn about Ukrainian deaths or Russian deaths for that matter. I really think he couldn't care less. And it's funny because he says all these young people, all these young people. Well, Ukraine does not draft young people, actually. You know, they're older people, which is nonetheless a tragedy. But it just shows how much he actually really has delved into this into the situation, how much he actually knows about it. So he's helping Russia with all these peace agreements, peace talks.
Can Ukraine survive if the U.S. pulls out all support overnight?
Yes, it can, right? And especially because more and more Ukraine is producing its own weapons, and also the Europeans have finally woken up and they understand the threat. So yes, Ukraine can survive. It's much better that we have U.S. support. That is definitely much better. But we will survive. Listen, there's no other option. You know, when someone comes into your house and wants to murder you, and they keep attacking you to murder you, and I don't know, maybe there's someone helping you by giving you a stick which you attack the attacker with and keeps breaking. I mean, you know, if he stops giving you that stick, I mean, maybe use your fist or something, use something, you know, to protect yourself. You're not just going to say, okay, arms down, let him kill me now, you know, and that's basically what it is. I mean, for the Russians to take over any other areas of Ukraine, they have a plan to murder Ukrainian speakers, the intelligentsia, anyone who's a journalist, an academic, all these people who are, you know, the backbone of the Ukrainian nation. He wants to, you know, destroy Ukraine as a nation so that it never comes back. Stalin did this with when he came into power. Or first there was Ukrainianization, you know, during the Soviet times when Lenin came into power, but then when Stalin came, all those Ukrainian professors, teachers, intelligentsia, he murdered all of them. Okay. Putin is a big fan of Stalin, and is, you know, all of Russia puts up monuments to Stalin and stuff. This is their plan. If you listen to a lot of the people, kind of, you know, not you know, the Lavrovs and stuff, you know, on that level, but all sorts of other people in Russia who are, you know, journalists, and I mean, you name it, you know. So these are people who are Kremlin-sponsored journalists and stuff. You will hear genocidal talk from them. That is what they want to do. And this is why it doesn't matter if we get no weapons from even the Europeans, we will continue to fight. There is no other option. I mean, it's either that or you die, right? So there is no other option. It's not, this is not a war over, you know, a little piece of territory. Let them have the territory and they'll go away. No, they will not go away because that's not the
No,
point.
I know. I don't doubt that Ukrainians will continue to fight. The question is whether they'll be able to succeed without the U.S. And you're saying yes. Uh, what about, you know, if Trump, whether, you know, one possibility is an agent, I don't know how that differs from being an asset exactly, but another possibility is he's very transactional, that this is just he's trying to wake people up, that we need to have different behavior, Trumpian behavior, or behavior that he likes, and then he will come back to a more normal behavior. He said he was going to make Canada the 51st state, but then he said publicly he would never militarily do this. He would do this economically. Uh, so he says X, and then he pulls back X, you know, but then it's kind of like you go 3 steps, you pull back 2, and you're up 1. Okay. So we don't know exactly because, for example, with universities, he's letting Columbia go back to getting its 400 or 400 million, $50 million of research funding under these conditions. So now Columbia is meeting these conditions. It's bowing the knee. Uh, were the Ukraine to say, look, make us your 51st state? Is that something that maybe that's not something that Ukraine could trust the outcome? Maybe the U.S. would take over and then hand it to Russia uh, under Trump. Or on the other hand, Trump might say, well, that's a great idea. Let's do it. Let's sign a deal tomorrow. It seems partly that Trump is saying with these uh, financial arrangements of mining arrangements, for example, or thinking about taking over the nuclear plant, your large, I don't know, I forget how to pronounce it exactly.
Zaporizhia.
Zaporizhia nuclear plant, that he's trying to put the U.S. into Ukraine so that Russia will stay away. So let's just try and argue from, let's assume he's not an asset, not an agent, and that he's just Trump. And are there things that Ukraine can do uh, to get to that side of him? And if they do that, will this will get the weapons back flowing? Do you
Right.
have any hope out for that, or do you think that's just pie in the sky?
Um, well, you see, when Zelensky offered these rare earth minerals, mining rights for U.S. companies and stuff in eastern Ukraine, which is where they're all found, Trump didn't use it. He didn't say, "Oh, great, okay, yeah, that'll, that'll make us more favorable to you." Basically, just said, "Yeah, that's going to be back payment for everything we've given you." So totally lied about it. I mean, Trump lies more often than he breathes, I think, and so, this it wasn't as if, "Oh, yeah, okay, so, you help us, we help you, this and that, right?" So I don't think, to say. Yeah, I mean, if we were to say, kind of knowing that again, you're speaking to a deranged little kid or something like this, and so you have to kind of massage his ego. So, give him a candy, right? Give him a candy or lots of candy, even, right? So say, yeah, hey, listen, we'll become your 51st state. Canada will be happy because then you'll get off their back, and But I don't, I don't think you'd go for that anyway because he has no respect for Ukraine. He basically thinks, and this is the funny thing, is that why doesn't he show up in Ukraine? Why doesn't he come to visit Ukraine? Vance also, Vance has been watching videos, right? Well, come visit Ukraine. I mean, come on, you guys are supposed to be tough guys. You guys served in the military, right? Well, Vance did anyway. Well, so come visit. I mean, all sorts of other leaders in the world have come to visit. You don't want to visit? You're scared or something? Are you scared your buddy Putin's going to bomb when you come or something? I mean, come on, you trust him, right? He's not going to bomb while you're there. But see, so this is the thing. They don't come to see what it's all about. And I think Trump thinks that, all of Ukraine is bombed, is destroyed. I mean, so there's nothing to get out of Ukraine. Why would you want this whole bombed territory? So, I don't think so.
So what
What's
we're looking at here, and we'll have to bring this to a close, but it sounds like what, from your perspective, and perhaps this is the right take, that these negotiations are sideshows, that they're not going to go anywhere, that Trump will say, I tried, Ukrainians uh, didn't, you know, he's going to come up with some perhaps excuse of why Ukraine somehow scullied undermined these negotiations, and therefore the U.S. is out of Ukraine. And you're saying that nonetheless, Ukraine will be able to continue survive. Do you see Sweden has a big military, Finland has a military? If they get involved, I guess then we're talking about Russia potentially attacking along the Finnish border or the Swedish border at the top.
Well, I'll say this. While Russia is occupied with Ukraine right now, like I said, well, Ukraine just attacked, invaded Belgorod Oblast. They have no power whatsoever to go and attack other countries right now, the way it is, while they're fighting Ukraine. It's when the war ends, that Russia could go and attack some other countries, and probably not Finland, but probably something small like, one of the Baltic countries. So, yeah, that's something they could do, but only if the war ended in Ukraine. I don't believe that European countries will, at this point right now, send troops to Ukraine to fight Russia. I do not believe that. I can't see that. Starmer's getting armies together. The British Army, the French have agreed to send troops to Ukraine, kind of as a protection force. It's not really peacekeepers, but to kind of be there. So if there was a peace sign, so they're there to keep the peace, so that the Russians wouldn't invade. Okay, but like I said, and of course the Russians are against that. But listen, of course the Russians are against that because their goal would be to get as much as possible now and then to attack, rearm, get stronger, and attack again later. Because again, they're not interested in just having the areas they occupy right now. Those areas are massively destroyed. They want all of Ukraine. They want to be able to control all of Ukraine, and they want to take it from there. It's an imperialist war. This is an imperialist war. This is not a war over language, about the rights of Russians or anything like this. I remind you that the places that Russia is bombing the most are the places where the biggest amount of Russians live, ethnic Russians and Russian speakers. Okay. He doesn't bomb Western Ukraine that much, where all the Ukrainian speakers and the people who are the most anti-Russian live. No, he doesn't bomb that. He's killing ethnic Russians and Russian speakers. And by the way, when in Kursk Oblast, what was interesting there was the Russians bombed the living daylights out of Kursk Oblast, anywhere the Ukrainians were, and destroying their own places, their own cities and towns and villages, and they were destroying it. So they couldn't care less about Russians, Russian territory, ethnic Russians, Russian speakers. They couldn't care less about human life. When it comes to Trump, can I just say this also? He's picked these fights with Canada and Mexico, his two biggest trading partners, put 25% tariffs on them. However, he only put 10%
Not
tariffs
yet.
on.
That's he put them on and pulled them back.
Well, right, and that's causing even more chaos. I mean, you're an economist, not me, but I think for business people and stuff, that makes it even worse. If it was just did it, okay, that's it. But the fact it's on again, off again, on again, off again, I mean, that just causes total
Right.
chaos. But at the same time, when he announced those tariffs, he announced 10% tariffs on China. So the big enemy, for the Trump administration, China, he announced 10. Then he brought it up to 20%. Okay. At the same time, he tells the Europeans, okay, we're not going to help you in Europe, with defense. You need to raise your spending to 5%. Okay. But the US is at 3.2%, I believe, of GDP for defense spending, 3.2. Then the next day, Hegseth says, we're going to cut military spending by 8% per year for 5 years, so lowering it by 40%. Now, that I guess brings it less than 2% of spending, right? If you're going to, lower it by 40%. And this is at a time when China and Russia are ramping up military spending. So hold on a second. How do you plan on focusing on China to fight China if you're going to you're lowering by 40% your defense spending, right? That doesn't make sense. So obviously, they don't consider China to be some sort of threat that they're going to fight. So again, who does this benefit? It doesn't benefit the United States. It doesn't benefit America's allies. It benefits America's enemies. I mean, this just doesn't make sense at all. This doesn't seem to be some sort of, really wow, intelligent bargaining, or deal making ability. I mean, this is just foolish. I mean, this makes no sense whatsoever.
Let's
And
maybe the best way to conclude this, the president is not uh, defending our country, and that's I don't think what his supporters were voting for. They weren't
no,
voting for somebody to defend or support uh, or let the Chinese, by analogy, by suggestion, take over Taiwan because it's okay for us to think about taking over Greenland militarily, or uh,
right,
Canada or Panama, all these things. And it's okay when you say that, when you say it's okay to take over some other country's land, you're saying to Russia, it's okay to take over Ukraine. It's okay to China to take over Taiwan.
right,
So you're giving the signals, uh, and who knows what the conversations are under the table. That's what
right.
no. So this is about as scary a time as you can have, I think,
It
in
is.
speaking. And I
And
want
I think it's the scariest thing is actually for the US, right? Not so much for Ukraine. It's scary for us, of course, but at least we know the Europeans are going to help because they're scared. The Ukrainian military is far larger. It has more tanks, artillery systems, I mean, massively more drones than any of the European armies, and probably all of them combined. So they realize that they have to help Ukraine because if Ukraine fails, then they're next. But for the U.S., we have some sort of hope at least. But for the U.S., I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with you. You've got a second President Musk in power, who nobody elected. I'm sick of hearing about corruption in Ukraine. In Ukraine, we never in history had a situation where an oligarch gave, 250 or $300 million, whatever it was, Musk gave to Trump, and then, automatically becomes the, second person in command after our president. I mean, that just never ever happened in Ukraine. I mean,
like
so tell us about corruption. What's that?
Rasputin, right?
Well, yeah, yeah, and then they're selling Teslas on the lawn of the White House. I mean, my God, that I mean, I've never seen that in Ukraine. We don't have that level of corruption. That is just crazy. That's just crazy. So yeah,
Here's the thing, I mean, this is just going to presumably lead to a boycott of American goods throughout the world, and probably the rest of the world is not going to deal in terms of intelligence sharing with the U.S. because they don't trust the U.S., the people
of
in
course.
charge. Uh, so the U.S. is really going to be by itself, is really what you're describing, and that is very dangerous for the U.S. We need our allies uh, because uh, we could be in the on the list of we have irrational people running the world, and so this is history, irrational history is the way I describe it. Uh,
Hmm.
if Putin were rational, he would have tried to become part of NATO and the EU on a gradual basis going back decades. Let's modernize our economy. Let's introduce capitalism in a real way. Let's get rid of the oligarchs' control. And but we're not seeing that happen. We have Xi, who's also a dictator in his own way. Uh, uh, and then we have Trump, and we have trouble. So
Yes.
God help us all, and God keep you safe and your family. Thank you
Yes,
so
thank you
much,
very much.
Anthony.
And same to you, Larry. God keep you safe because you're heading into very dangerous waters in the United States right now. So I mean, that's yeah, it's definitely it's dangerous for everybody actually all over the place. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, peace. Take
Yeah.
care.
Thank you. Thank you, Larry. Thanks very much. All the best.
You
All the
too.
best.